Picture a lone Viking longship cutting through the cold, dark waters of the North Sea, its slender form gliding effortlessly where no army could ever follow. This isn't just a ship, it's a masterpiece of design, built to navigate shallow rivers, cross vast oceans, and carry warriors and traders into the heart of unfamiliar lands. While we often think of empires as built by armies marching across continents, the truth is far more fascinating. The real story of how power spread across the globe begins not with the sword or the shield, but with the shape of a ship's hull, the cut of its sail, and the ingenuity hidden in its construction. From the earliest days of human civilization, it was the design of ships that allowed cultures to expand, trade, and dominate in ways ground forces never could. Imagine the Phoenicians threading their way through the Mediterranean, establishing colonies and trade networks thanks to the revolutionary bireme. Or picture the mighty Chinese treasure fleets of Admiral Chenghe, whose junks, with their battened sails and watertight compartments, projected influence from Asia to Africa without firing a shot in anger. These vessels did more than carry people and goods. They carried ideas, languages, religions, and entire ways of life. They quietly rewrote maps, shifted balances of power, and laid the foundations of the modern world, all while armies were still marching over the next hill. In this video, we're setting sail on a journey across thousands of years of naval history to uncover how ship design transformed the destiny of nations. We'll explore why a well-crafted rudder could matter more than a well-forged sword, and how the curve of a hull could determine the reach of an empire. This is a story of innovation, ambition, and sometimes pure genius, the kind that allowed humans to conquer not just land, but sea, wind, and wave. So settle in and get ready to see history in a whole new light from the deck of a ship that changed everything. But to understand how a ship could truly build an empire, we have to rewind the clock to the very beginning, to a time when the sea was a barrier, not a highway. The earliest boats were humble creations bound by their simple designs. Picture an Egyptian papyrus boat, a fragile bundle of reeds lashed together, perfectly suited for drifting down the calm Nile, but utterly helpless against the waves of the open Mediterranean. Or consider the Mesopotamian coracle, a round, basket-like boat coated in animal skins, ideal for fishing on calm rivers but impossible to steer with any precision on open water. These vessels were vital for local life, for trade along a riverbank or a short hop between visible coastlines, but they were prisoners of their own limitations. They could not venture far from shore, they could not carry heavy cargo, and they were vulnerable to the slightest change in weather. This was the world before naval power, a world of isolated communities separated by vast, uncrossable blue expanses. The revolution began with a people who saw the sea not as a wall, but as a field of opportunity. The Phoenicians, nestled on the coast of what is now Lebanon, with mountains at their backs and the sea at their front door, they had no choice but to look outward. Their genius was in reimagining the ship itself. They moved beyond the simple dugout canoe or the papyrus raft and began constructing ships from sturdy cedar wood, planks tightly fastened together to create a strong, seaworthy hull. Their masterpiece was the bireme. Imagine a long, sleek vessel, powered by a square sail to catch the wind efficiently on open water. But its true innovation lay in its two full banks of oars, stacked one above the other. This wasn't just about adding more rowers, it was about a fundamental shift in control. The sail provided power for distance, but the oars provided unparalleled maneuverability. A Phoenician captain could now row against the wind, pivot quickly to avoid a hazard, or accelerate rapidly to pursue prey, or escape a threat. This combination of sail and oar created a vessel that was both a capable cargo carrier and a formidable force. This new design didn't just make trade a little easier, it completely shattered the old boundaries. The Phoenicians could now sail farther, faster, and with more reliability than anyone before them. They ventured beyond the safe, familiar waters of the eastern Mediterranean, pushing west through the Strait of Gibraltar and down the Atlantic coast of Africa. Wherever they went, they established trading posts, little pieces of home that grew into powerful colonies. They founded Carthage, which would one day challenge Rome itself. They built a vibrant port at Cadiz in Spain, giving them access to the precious metals of the Iberian Peninsula. From Sicily to Sardinia to the coast of North Africa, a network of Phoenician settlements emerged, all connected by the steady rhythm of their biremes cutting through the waves. This was not an empire conquered by a marching army planting flags in the dirt. It was a commercial and cultural network, a maritime empire held together entirely by the superior design of their ships. The hull of the bireme was their passport, their fortress, and their warehouse. They proved for the first time in history that true power could be built not on land, but on water, and that the blueprint for that power was carved into the very shape of a ship's keel. Yet for all their ingenuity, the Phoenicians primarily built ships for trade and exploration. It would fall to another Mediterranean power, the Greeks, to fully weaponize naval design and turn the sea into a battlefield that could decide the fate of nations. When we picture ancient Greece, our minds often fill with images of hoplite soldiers, their bronze armor gleaming, standing shoulder to shoulder in an unbreakable phalanx formation. And while these citizen soldiers were indeed the backbone of Greek land power, it was actually a ship, the Trireme, that became the true engine of Athenian empire and the savior of Greek culture itself. This vessel was a masterpiece of focused aggression. Imagine a wooden spear over 120 feet long, slicing through the water at speeds that could approach 10 miles an hour. Its most striking feature was the 3 stacked banks of oars on each side, manned by a highly coordinated crew of 170 rowers. This wasn't just about raw power, it was about rhythm, precision, and breathtaking acceleration. The Trireme could go from a standstill to a full attack speed in moments, its sole purpose embodied in the terrifying bronze ram that jutted from its prow. This wasn't a ship for carrying goods. It was a specialized instrument of naval combat designed to deliver one devastating blow. The ultimate test of this design came in the narrow straits of Salamis in 480 BCE. The Persian Empire under King Xerxes had unleashed a massive invasion force, its army overwhelming northern Greece and its vast fleet numbering perhaps over 1,000 ships seeming unstoppable. The outnumbered Greek alliance, led by the Athenian commander Themistocles, had a desperate plan. They lured the heavier, less maneuverable Persian ships into the confined waters between the island of Salamis and the mainland. In this cramped space, the Persian numbers became a disadvantage, creating a chaotic traffic jam. The Greek triremes, agile and nimble, darted through the chaos. They executed a complex maneuver known as the Deekplus, a coordinated charge to row straight through gaps in the enemy line, shear off the oars of adjacent ships to immobilize them, and then swing around to ram their vulnerable sides. The sound must have been horrifying, the splintering of wood, the clash of bronze on hull, the cries of men thrown into the water. The Greeks used their superior ships not to board and fight, but to sink and destroy. By the end of the day, the Persian fleet was in ruins, and without naval support for his massive army, Xerxes was forced to retreat. the victory at Salamis was far more than a single battle won. It was a civilization preserved. Had the Persians succeeded, the experiment of Athenian democracy, the philosophical inquiries of Socrates and Plato, the foundational plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles, all of it could have been snuffed out. Instead, secure behind its wooden walls, Athens entered its golden age. The wealth and confidence from this victory funded the Parthenon, fueled the arts, and allowed democracy to flourish. But this cultural explosion was funded and protected by a fleet of triremes. Athens formed the Delian League, an alliance of city-states that quickly transformed into an Athenian empire. Member states paid tribute, which Athens used to build even more triremes, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of naval dominance. This thalassocracy, or rule by sea, allowed Athens to project its power, protect its trade routes, and spread its ideas, architecture, and political concepts across the Mediterranean. The trireme, therefore, was not merely a weapon of war. It was the delivery system for the very ideas that would become the bedrock of Western thought, proving that the shape of a ship could indeed carry the weight of an entire culture on its slender hull. But of course, the Greeks were not the only rising power in the Mediterranean. While Athens celebrated its naval artistry, a new force was stirring to the west, one that would approach the challenge of the sea from a completely different and brilliantly pragmatic angle. We all know the legendary discipline of the Roman legions, their organized camps and unbreakable formations that conquered Italy. Yet for a people so dominant on land, the sea presented a terrifying and unfamiliar frontier. In their first encounters with a true naval power, the mighty Carthaginian Empire, the Romans were hopelessly outmatched. Their early attempts at building a fleet were, by most accounts, disastrous. They essentially copied the design of a Carthaginian quinquereme that had run aground, but without the generations of shipbuilding knowledge, their versions were slow, cumbersome, and utterly unmaneuverable. A seasoned Carthaginian captain could easily outsail them, ramming the clumsy Roman vessels at will. It was a classic case of a master of land warfare being humiliated by a master of the sea. Faced with this stark disadvantage, a lesser power might have given up, but Roman ingenuity lay not in inventing entirely new things, but in adapting existing ideas to serve their unique strength. Their solution was not to try and become better sailors than the Carthaginians overnight. Instead, they asked a brilliantly simple question: how can we turn a naval battle into a land battle? The answer was a deceptively simple piece of engineering called the Corvus, or Raven. Imagine a wide wooden gangplank over 30 feet long, mounted to the deck of a Roman ship and able to pivot on a sturdy pole. At the far end of this ramp was a heavy, sharpened iron spike. When a Roman ship closed with an enemy vessel, instead of trying to maneuver for a complex ramming attack, they would simply drop the Corvus. The spike would slam down onto the enemy deck, locking the two ships together in a deadly embrace. In an instant, the rolling deck of a warship became stable ground. The Roman Marines, essentially legionaries trained for sea combat, would then charge across this bridge two abreast, bringing the fight to the enemy with their short swords and large shields. This innovation completely negated the Carthaginian advantage. Their skilled sailors could no longer use their speed and agility. Every engagement now became a close-quarters infantry brawl, and in that kind of fight, the Roman legionary was without equal. The true test of this new system came at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. The Carthaginian fleet, confident and experienced, sailed out to crush the upstart Roman navy. They expected to dance around the heavy Roman ships, picking them off one by one. Instead, they found themselves grappled, boarded, and overwhelmed. Ship after ship was captured by Roman marines storming across the Corvus. It was a stunning and decisive victory, Rome's first great triumph at sea, and it sent a shockwave across the Mediterranean. The Corvus was more than just a clever gadget, it was a strategic masterstroke. It allowed Rome to leverage its one undeniable strength, the unmatched quality of its infantry, in a domain where it had been weak. They didn't need to master the complexities of wind and oar, they just needed to build a bridge. In doing so, they effectively extended the reach of the Roman army across the waves, transforming the Mediterranean from a Carthaginian lake into a Roman highway and setting the stage for their eventual complete domination. They proved that winning a war at sea doesn't always require outsailing your enemy sometimes. You just need to find a way to bring the fight back to solid footing. While the Romans and later empires perfected the art of the heavy galley for controlling the warm, predictable waters of the Mediterranean, a very different kind of ship was being forged in the harsh shipyards of Scandinavia. Where the Trireme and its descendants were instruments of concentrated power, designed for set-piece battles in confined seas, the Viking longship was a masterpiece of adaptability. It was born from a need to survive and thrive in an environment of deep fjords, treacherous North Atlantic storms, and endless coastlines. This wasn't a ship built to fight other ships in a grand line of battle. It was built to go anywhere, to be the ultimate all-terrain vehicle of the medieval world. The genius of its design lies in a combination of features that seem almost contradictory. Picture its iconic silhouette, a long, narrow, and incredibly low riding hull, crowned with a single, towering square sail, often bearing vivid stripes or a fearsome symbol. Its most revolutionary feature was its incredibly shallow draft. A fully laden warship could float in just 3 feet of water. This meant it could slide effortlessly up onto a beach for a rapid landing, but more importantly, it could travel far inland via Europe's great river systems. The Seine, the Loire, the Volga, and the Dnieper became highways deep into the continent, allowing Vikings to appear suddenly hundreds of miles from the open ocean, far from any coastal defenses. This was complemented by its clinker-built construction. Instead of smooth, flush planks, the longship's hull was made of overlapping oak planks riveted together. This created a flexible, slightly supple shell that could bend and twist with the pounding of ocean waves rather than shatter like a rigid hull might. It was strong yet light, and this lightness, combined with its symmetrical bow and stern, gave it another crucial advantage. It could reverse direction instantly without needing to turn around. If a raid went wrong or the weather turned, a Viking crew could simply change the steering oar from one end to the other and row back the way they came at full speed. This design didn't just enable travel, it enabled a completely new form of warfare and exploration based on speed, surprise, and a swift exit. The impact of this technological marvel was immediate and terrifying for the settled kingdoms of Europe. Monasteries like Lindisfarne, isolated on coastal islands thought to be sanctuaries from the world, were suddenly and brutally vulnerable. A longship could appear on the horizon at dawn, and by midday, its crew could have looted the treasure, captured slaves, and vanished back into the sea mists long before any local lord could muster his knights and march to the coast. The psychological effect was profound. The Vikings weren't just attackers, they were phantoms striking from a dimension, the sea, that their victims could not effectively patrol or defend. The very shape of their ships created a pervasive, lingering fear that reshaped the political landscape, forcing kingdoms to invest in coastal watches and fortified towns, pulling their focus and resources toward the shore. But to label the Vikings merely as raiders is to miss the broader picture their ships painted. The same vessel that carried a warband to plunder a monastery could, on its next voyage, be packed with furs, amber, and antlers to trade in a market in Dublin or Hedeby. It could carry families, their animals, and all their worldly goods on a journey of colonization to the empty shores of Iceland or the green coasts of Greenland. The flexibility of the longship was the flexibility of Norse society itself. It was a tool for every purpose. This is perhaps best illustrated by their staggering westward expansion. Using their ships as floating bases, they island-hopped across the North Atlantic, settling the Faroes, then Iceland, then Greenland. Finally, under the command of Leif Erikson, a Norse expedition reached the coast of North America around the year 1000, establishing a short-lived settlement they called Vinland. This was 500 years before Columbus, and it was only possible because the longship was tough enough to survive the icy, storm-racked crossing of the North Atlantic. They weren't following coastlines, they were sailing across the open ocean, navigating by the sun, stars, and an intimate knowledge of seabirds and wave patterns. To the east, the story was the same, but with a different cargo. Vikings known to the locals as the Rus used their ships to travel the river routes of Eastern Europe, portaging between watersheds. They established trade networks that reached all the way to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, eventually founding a trading post that would grow into the city of Kiev. Some even traveled further, serving as elite mercenary guards for the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople. The famed Varangian Guard. Their journey from the fjords of Norway to the golden halls of the greatest city in the world was made possible by the same ship that had carried their ancestors on coastal raids. The longship, therefore, was far more than a vessel. It was the physical manifestation of the Viking Age. It was a mobile, seafaring culture. It carried not just warriors, but traders, settlers, explorers, laws, language, and art. Its design allowed for a decentralized, network-based form of expansion that was entirely different from the centralized, army-driven conquests of a Rome or a Persia. The legacy of the longship is written in the DNA of nations from Russia to England, in the cities of Dublin and Normandy, and in the independent spirit of Iceland. It proved that a culture built around a perfectly adapted tool could reshape a continent without ever needing to field a traditional army, achieving a level of influence and reach that heavy infantry could only dream of. While the Vikings were mastering the cold northern seas with their agile longships, an entirely different maritime revolution was underway on the other side of the world, one that would produce what many historians consider the most efficient and advanced sailing vessel ever built, the Chinese junk. At a time when much of Europe was fragmented and inward looking after the fall of Rome, China's Song and Ming dynasties were fostering an era of breathtaking technological innovation. Their shipyards were not just building boats, they were engineering marvels of the aquatic world, designed to conquer the mighty Pacific and Indian Oceans with a level of safety and sophistication that European sailors wouldn't achieve for centuries. The genius of the junk lies in a suite of features that, when combined, created a vessel of unparalleled capability. Let's start with its most distinctive feature, the sail. Unlike the simple square sails common in the West, which could only really push a ship with the wind, the junk used a fully battened sail, a technology so effective it's still used today. Picture a series of horizontal wooden battens sewn into a panel of strong cloth, creating a rigid yet adjustable airfoil. This ingenious design allowed a sailor to reef the sail, to reduce its area in a strong wind in seconds, simply by pulling a few lines. It was as effortless as closing a Venetian blind. This gave the junk remarkable control and stability in storms, but its real magic was in its ability to sail close to the wind, to tack at angles that would leave a square-rigged ship dead in the water. This meant a junk was never truly stranded. It could make headway in almost any conditions, turning the unpredictable ocean into a more manageable highway. Beneath the waterline, the junk boasted another revolutionary feature, the stern-mounted rudder. While European ships were still using clumsy steering oars lashed to the side of the vessel, Chinese engineers had mounted a large, full rudder directly onto the sternpost, connected to a wheel or tiller for precise control. This was the nautical equivalent of power steering, giving the massive ship incredible handling. Perhaps the most life-saving innovation, however, was hidden within the hull itself, watertight bulkhead compartments. The junk's interior was divided into separate sections by solid walls, each sealed from the others. If the ship struck a rock or was holed in a storm, only one compartment would flood, while the others remained watertight and buoyant. This simple yet brilliant concept, inspired by the segmented structure of bamboo, kept the vessel afloat and saved countless lives and cargoes. It's a fundamental principle of modern naval architecture, yet it was standard on Chinese junks over 1,000 years ago. This mastery of the seas reached its magnificent zenith in the early 15th century under the command of the Muslim eunuch Admiral, Chenghe. Commissioned by the Yongle Emperor, Chenghe embarked on a series of 7 epic voyages of exploration, not conquest. His fleet was a floating city, a spectacle designed to overwhelm through sheer grandeur and peaceful intent. The legendary treasure ships at the heart of this armada were staggering in their scale. Historical records suggest the largest of these junks stretched over 400 feet from stem to stern. That's longer than a modern football field, and dwarfing the tiny vessels Columbus would sail nearly a century later. They were multi-masted giants, with 9 staggered poles carrying vast arrays of battened sails, capable of carrying hundreds of sailors, soldiers, diplomats, and translators, along with vast holds filled with silks, porcelain, and other luxurious goods intended as gifts. Chenghe's mission was one of soft power long before the term existed. His fleet sailed throughout the South China Sea and across the Indian Ocean, following ancient trade routes all the way to the coast of East Africa. They didn't arrive with cannons blazing. They arrived with bands playing, flags flying, and holds full of magnificent presents. In modern-day Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia, they exchanged gifts with local rulers, established trade agreements, and enrolled foreign leaders into the Ming system of tribute, a diplomatic framework that recognized the emperor's supremacy in exchange for lucrative trading privileges. They returned to China with exotic ambassadors, rare animals like giraffes and zebras for the imperial zoo, and spices and gems that enriched the empire. These voyages projected Chinese influence, culture, and economic might across half the world, creating a network of peaceful alliances and trade partnerships that stretched for thousands of miles. The story of the treasure fleet, however, also holds a profound and cautionary lesson about the fleeting nature of maritime power. After the death of the Yongle Emperor and Admiral Chenghe, a new faction of conservative, inward-looking mandarins gained influence at court. They argued that these magnificent voyages were a wasteful extravagance, that the real threats and opportunities for China lay within its own vast borders, not across strange oceans. The world beyond was deemed barbaric and irrelevant. In a stunning act of historical reversal, the great shipyards were shuttered, the records of the voyages were largely destroyed, and a policy of isolationism was enforced. The technology behind these incredible ships was deliberately forgotten, and China's window to the world was slammed shut. Just decades before European explorers like Vasco da Gama would begin their own age of exploration, China voluntarily retreated from the seas. This decision had consequences that would echo for centuries, demonstrating that even the most advanced ship design is meaningless without the political will and visionary ambition to use it. The Chinese junk had built a bridge to the world, but for a time the empire chose not to cross it. Yet for all the glory of the treasure fleets and the terror of the longship, the true engine of empire often hums a quieter, more practical tune. While kings and emperors focused on building grand warships for conquest, a different kind of revolution was taking shape in the bustling ports of northern Europe, one built not on cannon or ram, but on cargo capacity and reliability. The age of the Viking raider was giving way to the age of the Hanseatic merchant, and their tool of choice was a stout, unglamorous, but utterly transformative vessel known as the cog. If the longship was a sleek predator, the cog was a workhorse broad in the beam, deep in the hull, and built for one purpose above all others: to carry as much stuff as possible as safely and cheaply as possible. Its design was a direct response to the economic needs of the High Middle Ages. As populations grew and cities expanded, the demand for bulk goods skyrocketed. Wool from England, grain from Prussia, salt from Lüneburg, wine from France, and timber from Scandinavia all needed to move across the treacherous waters of the North and Baltic Seas. The cog was perfectly suited for this task. Its most defining feature was its clinker-built hull that used a revolutionary method of construction. Instead of the overlapping planks running the full length of the ship, the cog's hull was built from massive, flush-laid planks on its bottom, creating a stronger, more robust frame, while the sides reverted to traditional clinker style for flexibility. This created a hull that was incredibly strong and, crucially, able to support a much larger internal cargo space. Above this cavernous hold rose a single, enormous square sail, a simple and efficient system that required a smaller crew than a galley's bank of oars, drastically cutting the cost of operation. At the stern, the cog introduced another critical innovation: the sternpost rudder. Unlike the side-mounted steering oar used on longships and galleys, which was vulnerable in heavy seas, the rudder was fixed centrally to the sternpost and connected to a tiller. This gave the cog's helmsman far greater control, especially in rough weather, making these heavy-laden ships safer on the unpredictable northern seas. It was a design of pure, pragmatic genius, a floating warehouse that could brave the autumn gales and deliver its goods, and the profits they represented, intact. This robust vessel found its perfect purpose in the hands of the Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns. The Hanse wasn't a country with an army or a king. It was a network, a medieval version of a multinational corporation, and its empire was built on trade. The cog was the physical infrastructure of that empire. These ships moved in predictable convoys, following established sea lanes between key port cities like Lübeck, Bruges, London, Bergen, and Novgorod. The reliability of the cog allowed the League to establish a system of foreign trading posts, known as Konter, which operated under their own laws and enjoyed special privileges granted by local rulers eager for access to their goods. The economic power this generated was staggering. The wealth from the cog trade literally built the cities of northern Europe. The magnificent red brick Gothic town halls, guild halls, and churches that still define the skylines of cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Gdansk were funded by tariffs and merchant profits. The bustling cloth markets of Bruges, the very heart of medieval European commerce, were supplied by English wool transported in the holds of Hanseatic cogs. This was an empire of ledgers and trade agreements, not of conquest and occupation. The Hanse's navy was its merchant fleet, and its soldiers were its accountants. They could enforce their will through economic blockade, refusing to trade with a city that defied them, an action that could cripple a local economy overnight. The cog, therefore, was more than just a ship. It was a tool of economic sovereignty. It proved that control over the movement of goods could be as potent a form of power as control over territory, and that the humble freighter, in its own quiet way, could weave together the fortunes of nations and fund the cultural zenith of an entire era, leaving a legacy of stone and commerce that far outlasted many a kingdom won by the sword. Yet for all the economic power generated by the sturdy cogs of the Hanseatic League, their world was still a regional one, confined to the familiar, if stormy, waters of northern Europe. The true global revolution in ship design was being forged under the sun of southern Europe, driven by a tiny kingdom with monumental ambitions, Portugal. For centuries, the wealth of the East spices, silks, and gems had traveled along arduous and expensive overland routes, passing through countless middlemen from the Indian Ocean, whirled up through the Middle East and into the hands of Italian merchants in the Mediterranean. This chain was long, fragile, and by the 15th century increasingly controlled by the expanding Ottoman Empire, which levied heavy taxes and could cut the flow of luxury goods at will. For a poor nation on the geographic periphery of Europe like Portugal, accessing this wealth directly was not just an economic opportunity, it was a national obsession. But to do it, they needed a ship that could defy the very nature of the Atlantic Ocean itself. The prevailing wisdom and maritime technology of the Mediterranean were ill-suited for this new challenge. The classic galley, powered by oars and a simple square sail, was useless on the open ocean. It could not carry enough provisions for long voyages, its low freeboard made it vulnerable to Atlantic swells, and its need for frequent stops to water and feed its large crew made it impractical for exploring unknown coasts. What was needed was a vessel that was sturdy enough to handle weeks of blue water sailing, nimble enough to explore uncharted rivers and coastlines, and efficient enough to be operated by a small crew to maximize space for cargo and supplies. The Portuguese answer, refined under the visionary patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator at his research center at Sagres, was a hybrid vessel that borrowed the best ideas from different maritime traditions, the Caravel. Its genius was in its flexible sail plan. The Caravel typically featured 2 or 3 masts, and the true breakthrough was the use of lateen sails. These were triangular sails mounted on long, sloping yards, a technology adopted from the Arab dhows that plied the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean. A lateen-rigged ship could do something miraculous. It could sail close to the wind, tacking back and forth at angles as sharp as 60 degrees. This gave the Caravel an incredible ability to make progress against prevailing winds, a critical advantage when sailing down the coast of West Africa, where the winds and currents often pushed ships away from the shore, making return voyages north nearly impossible. For exploration, this was a superpower. A captain could venture into the unknown with confidence, knowing he had the maneuverability to work his way out of dangerous situations and, most importantly, to get back home. But lateen sails, while agile, were not the most efficient for making straight-line speed with a following wind. So shipbuilders began creating caravelas redondas, or round caravels, which combined the best of both worlds. They kept the lateen rig on the mizzenmast at the stern for maneuverability, but added a square-rigged sail on the mainmast. This square sail could catch a following wind beautifully, propelling the ship forward with great speed on long ocean crossings. This hybrid design made the Caravel the all-terrain vehicle of the Age of Discovery, agile enough to dart in and out of estuaries and river mouths to map new lands, yet robust and fast enough to cross thousands of miles of open ocean. Equipped with this revolutionary vessel, Portuguese captains began their methodical descent down the western coast of Africa. Each voyage was a lesson in wind patterns, currents, and geography. They established feitorias, small fortified trading posts, as they went, building a maritime ladder of knowledge and resources down the continent. the Caravel was their perfect tool. Its shallow draft allowed it to sail close to shore to make observations and easily beach for repairs. Its small crew required fewer supplies, allowing for longer voyages. In 1488, Bartholomew Dias, commanding a caravel, was blown around the southern tip of Africa by a fierce storm, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected and that the sea route to India was not a myth. Just a decade later, Vasco da Gama would complete the journey, using his caravels to sail around the Cape of Good Hope and across the Indian Ocean to the legendary spice port of Calicut. The impact was immediate and earth-shattering. Portugal had bypassed the Ottoman and Venetian monopolies entirely. A ship loaded with pepper in India could now sail directly to Lisbon, and the profits from a single voyage could pay for the entire fleet many times over. Portugal swiftly built a vast maritime empire, a network of strategic ports from Brazil to Mozambique to Macau, all held together by the humble Caravel. This was not an empire of mass settlement and conquered territory, but an empire of trade routes and naval bases, a true thalassocracy built on nautical innovation. And the Caravel's influence did not stop with Portugal. It was the model that convinced a Genoese navigator named Christopher Columbus that a westward voyage to Asia was feasible. His flagship, the Santa Maria, was a larger cargo ship called a nau, but his two other vessels, the Nina and the Pinta, were caravels. It was their maneuverability and windward capability that proved vital on the transatlantic crossing. Similarly, Ferdinand Magellan's voyage of circumnavigation, which began in 1519, relied on caravel-inspired designs to navigate the treacherous straits at the tip of South America that now bear his name and to survive the vast expanse of the Pacific. In the span of less than a single human lifetime, the Caravel had enabled explorers to stitch together the entire globe, connecting continents that had been isolated from each other for millennia. It had achieved what centuries of crusades and land wars had failed to do. It broke the old world order and built a new one, proving decisively that the future of power and prosperity would belong to those who mastered the design of the wooden hulls that dared to cross the deep. But the Caravel, for all its revolutionary impact, was ultimately a ship of exploration and discovery. It could chart a course to new worlds, but it could not reliably defend the unimaginable wealth those worlds contained on the long, perilous journey back home. As the Spanish Empire struck a mountain of silver at Potosi and began flooding its holds with the riches of the Americas, it needed a new kind of vessel, one that was not just a transporter of treasure, but a floating fortress designed to protect it. The answer to this colossal challenge emerged from the shipyards of the 16th century, the Galleon. This was no longer a lean explorer. It was the ultimate hybrid, a formidable fusion of the merchant cog's cavernous cargo hold and the warship's devastating broadside, engineered for a single purpose: to sustain an empire on a global scale. Imagine this behemoth of the seas. Its profile was unmistakable and intentionally intimidating. Riding high in the water due to its deeply curved hull, the Galleon was crowned with towering fore and aft castles, multi-decked superstructures that loomed over the waves. These castles were not for royal guests, they were fortified fighting platforms. From these high vantage points, soldiers could fire muskets and small cannons down onto the decks of lower-lying enemy ships, much like archers firing from the battlements of a castle wall. This design was a clear statement of intent. Come too close and you will be met with a hail of fire. But the Galleon's true teeth were arrayed along its sides. A full-bodied galleon could carry up to 50 or 60 heavy bronze and iron cannons mounted on sturdy wooden carriages behind reinforced gun ports. This was the birth of the broadside, the ability to unleash a coordinated, crushing volley of cannon fire from one entire side of the ship. a tactic that could reduce an opponent to splinters in a matter of minutes. For the first time, a ship could carry enough firepower to decisively win a naval battle without ever needing to close for boarding. This formidable armament was perfectly paired with its other primary function, carrying capacity. The Galleon's hull was a masterpiece of volumetric efficiency, designed with a distinctive rounded, Caravel-built hull where the planks were laid flush against a strong internal frame. This created a smooth outer surface and, more importantly, a vast, strong, and watertight interior. Into these deep holds, the Spanish would load the incredible wealth of their New World colonies, chests overflowing with silver pieces of 8 minted in Mexico and Peru, gold ingots, emeralds from Colombia, and exotic goods like cochineal dye and tobacco. A single successful voyage could transfer a king's ransom across the Atlantic, financing the ambitions of the Spanish Habsburgs for years. The most famous of these treasure-laden convoys was the Flota de Indias, the Spanish treasure fleet. This was not a random collection of ships but a highly organized, state-controlled armada that sailed in an annual convoy from Havana to Seville, a floating economic lifeline so vital that its safe arrival was a matter of national survival. The Spanish galleon, therefore, became the absolute symbol of imperial power and global reach. It was the engine that funded the armies of Philip II, paid for the construction of the Escorial Palace, and bankrolled Spain's dominant role in European politics and wars for over a century. The constant flow of precious metals from these ships made Spain the world's first truly global superpower, with territories upon which, it was famously said, the sun never set. The galleon was the physical tether that bound this vast empire together, a mobile, armed conduit for wealth and power. Yet, for all its strengths, the galleon's design contained the seeds of its own vulnerability. Those imposing high castles that gave it such a tactical advantage also created a dangerously high center of gravity. In strong winds, a fully laden galleon could become an unstable, top-heavy beast, rolling violently and risking catastrophe. The very wealth it carried could become its coffin. This critical flaw was exposed in the most dramatic fashion possible in the summer of 1588. When the Spanish Armada, a grand fleet of over 130 ships, including many of Spain's most powerful galleons, sailed to invade England, it met not just the nimble English ships but the fierce and unpredictable weather of the North Atlantic. The English commanders, including Sir Francis Drake, understood the weaknesses of their opponent. They refused to engage in a close-range boarding battle where the Spanish soldiers would excel. Instead, they used their lower, more maneuverable vessels to stand off and fire their longer-range culverin guns at the Spanish hulls, knowing a full-on collision was unnecessary. After being harried and battered by the English through the Channel, the Armada's fate was sealed by the weather. Their planned retreat around the treacherous coasts of Scotland and Ireland turned into a nightmare. The unstable galleons, already damaged, were utterly helpless against a series of powerful autumn gales. Dozens of these magnificent ships were driven onto rocky shores and shattered. Thousands of Spain's best sailors and soldiers drowned in the cold waters, their bodies and the empire's prestige washing up on the beaches. The disaster of the Armada was a crushing blow from which Spanish naval power never fully recovered. It was a stark lesson in the laws of physics and naval architecture. A design optimized for the calm waters of the Caribbean and the transport of treasure could be fatally flawed when faced with the brutal conditions of the North Sea. The galleon story is thus a perfect paradox of naval history. In its success, it built the first global empire, demonstrating how a ship could be engineered to project power across unimaginable distances. But in its failure, it proved that even the most powerful designs must bow to the unforgiving sea. and that a flaw in the blueprint could ultimately sink the ambitions of kings and change the course of history. While the Spanish galleon served the ambitions of a crown, a new and arguably more powerful force was rising from the merchant ports of northern Europe, one that would wield ships not in the name of a king, but in the name of shareholders. The 17th century witnessed the birth of a revolutionary concept, the corporation as a sovereign power. These were not mere trading houses. They were entities granted monopolies by their governments, with the authority to raise armies, wage war, negotiate treaties, and govern foreign territories. And their primary instrument of global domination was a new class of ship, meticulously designed for a single, ruthless purpose: maximizing profit over unimaginable distances. The Dutch East India Company's Retorskip and the British East India Company's East Indiaman were not just vessels. They were the armed, floating boardrooms of history's first multinational corporations. Their design was a masterclass in pragmatic compromise. They needed to be warships capable of defending their priceless cargo from pirates, privateers, and rival European companies in fierce, often brutal, naval engagements. Yet they also needed to be massive freighters, with cavernous holds to carry enough trade goods outward and return packed to the beams with spices, silk, and tea. Most critically, they had to be durable enough to survive not just months, but years on a single voyage, facing the rot of the tropics, the pounding of southern ocean storms, and the relentless wear of the open sea, all while turning a profit for distant investors. The East Indiaman that resulted was a majestic, almost deceptive sight. To the untrained eye, it looked every bit a powerful ship of the line, with high sides, multiple gun decks, and the sleek lines of a warship. This was an intentional bluff, a form of naval mimicry designed to scare off potential attackers, but a seasoned captain would notice key differences. Its hull was noticeably broader and deeper, sacrificing a little speed and maneuverability for immense storage capacity. It carried heavy cannons, often 50 or more, but these were typically a mix of older, cheaper guns, sufficient for defense but not for pursuing a naval battle. The priority was always protection, not aggression. The entire architecture of the ship was subservient to the balance sheet. The Dutch Retorskip, or return ship, was so named because its entire existence was dedicated to making one successful round-trip voyage from the Netherlands to the Spice Islands and back, a journey that could take over 2 years. Every detail was optimized for this cycle. The crew quarters were cramped and austere to make more room for cargo. The hull was built from the strongest oak, carefully seasoned and sheathed in thin lead or copper plating below the waterline to ward off shipworm and marine growth, which could slow a vessel to a crawl and doom its commercial viability. The holds were designed with intricate systems of shelves and compartments to safely store fragile porcelain jars, prevent precious peppercorns from spoiling, and keep bolts of Indian cotton dry. This was logistics elevated to a high art, where the precise stowage of a cargo could mean the difference between bankruptcy and a fortune that could influence a nation's economy. And the fortunes at stake were almost beyond comprehension. A single East Indiaman returning safely to London or Amsterdam could unload a cargo of nutmeg, cloves, and pepper worth over £50,000 sterling, a sum that could pay for the construction of 10 new ships and still deliver a massive dividend. This financial engine allowed the companies to operate with breathtaking autonomy. The British East India Company raised its own private army, larger than the British Army itself, to enforce its will on the Indian subcontinent. The Dutch East India Company fought full-scale wars against the Portuguese and the English to control the Spice Islands, and its actions in the Banda Islands to protect a nutmeg monopoly remain a stark example of corporate brutality. They didn't just trade with local rulers, they supplanted them, building a corporate-run state where profit was the only law. The true legacy of the East Indiaman, therefore, lies not in a famous battle or a voyage of discovery, but in a ledger. It was the vehicle that transported capitalism onto the global stage, demonstrating that economic power, when projected across the oceans by the right ship, could carve out territories and influence destinies as effectively as any imperial fleet. The design of these ships made the world smaller and markets global, but it also revealed a new truth, that the future of empire could be written not by generals and conquistadors, but by merchants and accountants, all sailing aboard a vessel built for dividend. Yet for all the corporate power embodied by the East Indiaman, its primary role remained commerce, its cannons a means of defense. The 18th century, however, demanded a vessel of pure, unadulterated offensive power, a machine built for one purpose, to win decisive control of the open ocean. This era witnessed the refinement of naval warfare into something almost mathematical, a brutal calculus of firepower and durability, and the ultimate expression of this doctrine was the ship of the line. This was no armed merchantman, it was a dedicated instrument of national policy, a floating fortress whose very design was dictated by a simple, ruthless principle: the ability to stand in the line of battle and unleash hell. The name itself reveals its purpose. In the classic naval engagement of the age, opposing fleets would form themselves into long, single-file lines, sailing parallel to each other to bring their greatest asset, their broadside cannon, to bear. The ship of the line was the only vessel rugged and powerful enough to hold its place in this terrifying, methodical exchange of fire. Its design was a masterpiece of focused aggression and resilience. Imagine a mountain of oak soaring high out of the water, its sides punctuated by long rows of square gun ports that hid a devastating secret. A first-rate ship of the line, the mightiest class of these behemoths, could carry over 100 heavy cannons on 3 continuous gun decks. The largest of these guns, the 32-pounder on the lowest deck, could fire a solid iron shot that weighed 32 pounds, a projectile capable of smashing through 2 feet of solid oak at close range, turning the opposite side of a ship into a deadly storm of splinters that could maim and kill dozens of men in an instant. The sound alone of a full broadside from such a vessel was described as a rolling thunder that could be heard for 20 miles, a physical shockwave that shook the sea itself. But these ships were not just about attack, they were built to endure incredible punishment. Their hulls were constructed from the finest English oak, a material that was not only strong but possessed a crucial flexibility. When struck by an enemy cannonball, a thick oak plank would often absorb the impact or splinter in a more controlled way, unlike more brittle woods. The hull's framing was a complex interlocking skeleton of knees and beams, creating a structure of immense strength that could withstand the recoil of its own guns and the hammering of the enemies. A ship of the line was designed to be shot to pieces and still remain afloat and fighting, its crew plugging holes and manning guns even as the world exploded around them. This combination of overwhelming firepower and legendary toughness made it the ultimate arbiter of global power for over a century. The zenith of this naval philosophy, and its most iconic moment, arrived on a blustery morning off the coast of Cape Trafalgar on October 21, 1805. The combined fleets of France and Spain, sought by Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson, were finally sighted. Nelson's fleet was outnumbered, but he possessed a weapon his opponents lacked, not just better ships, but a revolutionary tactical doctrine that leveraged their design to its absolute limit. The conventional wisdom of the day demanded adhering to the rigid line of battle. Nelson threw that book overboard. Instead of forming a parallel line, he divided his force into two columns and drove them perpendicularly at right angles straight into the enemy fleet. It was an incredibly audacious and risky maneuver. For agonizing minutes, his lead ships, including his flagship HMS Victory, could not return fire as they sailed directly into the combined broadsides of the enemy. They were sitting ducks, absorbing terrible damage, but this was the genius of the plan. Nelson understood that the sturdy construction of his ships of the line could survive this gauntlet. He was gambling the fate of England on the quality of their oak hulls, and he was right. Once his columns pierced the enemy line, they broke its cohesion, creating a chaotic melee, exactly the kind of close-quarters combat where British gunnery excellence, drilled to a speed of 3 rounds every 2 minutes, would prove decisive. British gun crews could fire twice, sometimes 3 times, for every single French or Spanish volley. The battle became a slaughter. When the smoke finally cleared, the Royal Navy had not won a mere victory. It had annihilated the enemy fleet without losing a single one of its own ships. Nelson was mortally wounded, becoming an immortal national hero in the process, but his triumph was absolute. Trafalgar shattered Napoleon's dreams of invading Britain and established an unchallengeable British naval supremacy that would last for the next 100 years. The impact of this victory, secured by the ship of the line, extended far beyond a single battle. It ushered in the Pax Britannica, a long period of relative global peace enforced by the Royal Navy's overwhelming presence on every ocean. This was the true meaning of thalassocracy rule by sea. Britain did not need to conquer and occupy every continent. It simply needed to control the maritime highways that connected them. The mighty ships of the line were the guardians of these highways. Their mere presence on a trade route deterred pirates and privateers, making shipping safer and cheaper than ever before. They could appear off the coast of any rival nation, threatening its ports and blockading its commerce, applying economic pressure without ever deploying a single soldier ashore. This global reach allowed a relatively small island nation to administer a vast empire upon which the sun never set, all supported by a navy whose backbone was the timeless, terrifying, and majestic ship of the line. It was the final, perfect evolution of the wooden-walled fortress, a design so effective it maintained its reign until a new invention, steam, iron, and explosive shells, would finally render its towering wooden walls obsolete. Yet for all the thunderous power of a ship of the line's broadside, its reign was ultimately challenged not by a bigger gun, but by a stopwatch. The 19th century ushered in a new age defined by steam, steel, and a relentless globalizing urgency. In this rapidly industrializing world, information and goods began to move at speeds previously unimaginable, and the value of a cargo started to be measured not just in its weight, but in its freshness. A new kind of race was born, one run not on land, but across the vast expanse of the world's oceans, and the vessel built to win it was a breathtakingly beautiful and utterly single-minded machine, the clipper ship. This was not a ship of war or bulk cargo. It was a ship of pure, unadulterated speed, a greyhound of the seas whose design sacrificed everything for velocity, and in doing so, shrank the globe in a way that forever changed the rhythm of daily life. To understand the clipper's purpose, one must first grasp the immense value of time in this new economic equation. Consider the most famous of all maritime races, the hunt for the season's first tea from China. The first ship to dock in London with the new harvest could command a spectacular price premium, sometimes double or triple that of the second ship to arrive. A journey that might ordinarily take 120 days could, in the hands of a skilled captain on a swift clipper, be slashed to a blistering 90. Those 30 days were worth a fortune. This frantic competition gave birth to the clipper's iconic form, a radical departure from the tubby, capacious East Indiaman that had come before. Every line of its hull was a study in hydrodynamics. It was long, narrow, and rakishly low in the water, with a knife-like bow that sliced through waves rather than pushing them aside. Its most dramatic feature was its enormous sail plan. Towering masts carried a vast cloud of canvas, skyscrapers, moonrakers, and studding sails that extended far out on booms to catch every last whisper of wind. A fully rigged clipper under full sail was one of the most majestic sights ever crafted by human hands, a symphony of wood, rope, and wind harnessed for the sole purpose of flight. This obsession with speed transformed the nature of global trade itself. For the first time, truly perishable goods could become global commodities. It wasn't just about tea. In Australia and New Zealand, the wool clip from vast merino sheep stations was loaded onto clippers like the famous Cutty sock for the long run to the textile mills of England. Faster voyages meant fresher wool, commanding better prices. The same was true for everything from fresh fruit to fine wine. The clipper ship became the vital circulatory system of the British Empire, pumping goods, people, and information between its distant heart and its far-flung limbs with a new, feverish pulse. It allowed London to feel connected to Sydney, Hong Kong to Liverpool, in a matter of weeks rather than months. This tightening of the imperial bonds was a form of power as potent as any naval squadron, ensuring that even the most remote colony remained firmly within the economic and cultural orbit of the metropolis. The men who commanded these ships were less like traditional sea captains and more like elite athletes, pushing their vessels and crews to the absolute limit in a high-stakes gamble against the elements and each other. They drove their ships hard, often carrying a press of sail in conditions that would have sent a more cautious captain reefing hours before. They navigated the roaring 40s of the Southern Ocean, the fierce winds that whip around the bottom of the globe, using them as a slingshot to propel them eastward at phenomenal speeds. The logs from these voyages read like thrillers, recording daily runs of over 250 nautical miles, a feat almost unheard of for a sailing vessel. The friendly rivalry between American and British clippers, particularly the famed contests between the American Flying Cloud and the British ships, became front-page news on both sides of the Atlantic, capturing the public's imagination and turning these ships and their captains into international celebrities. They were the astronauts of their age, exploring the outer limits of speed and human endurance. However, this glorious age of canvas and wind was tragically brief. The very industrial revolution that had created the demand for speed soon provided its own, more reliable answer, the steam-powered iron hull. While the clipper relied on the fickle nature of the wind, the steamship could maintain a constant, predictable speed regardless of the weather. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 was the final, decisive blow. This shortcut to the east was useless to tall, masted sailing ships, trapped by the constant headwinds and narrow confines of the Red Sea, but it was a perfect highway for steamships. Almost overnight, the clipper's greatest advantage, its blazing speed on a long ocean run, was rendered obsolete by the steamship's shorter, more consistent route. One by one, the great clippers were retired from the premium tea and wool trades, their beautiful lines relegated to carrying bulk cargoes like guano or grain, a sad end for such aristocrats of the sea. But the legacy of the clipper ship is far more profound than its short commercial lifespan might suggest. It was the final and most beautiful evolution of the commercial sailing vessel, a perfect marriage of art and function. More importantly, it proved a revolutionary concept that in a modern, interconnected world, velocity itself is a form of capital. The clipper didn't just deliver tea, it delivered time. It demonstrated that the ability to move goods and information faster than a competitor could be just as decisive as controlling a territory or winning a naval battle. It set a new standard for global logistics that we still live by today, where next-day delivery and instant communication are the expected norms. The Clipper's spirit of speed now lives on in container ships, jet airliners, and fiber optic cables, but it was those lean, graceful hulls, straining under a mountain of white canvas, that first taught the world the immense value of being first. Yet for all the breathtaking speed and beauty of the Clipper ship, its reign was built on a foundation that was about to be rendered utterly obsolete: wood and wind. The Industrial Revolution, which had created the demand for such speed, was now poised to unleash a new kind of vessel, one that would not merely outpace the Clipper, but would completely redefine the very nature of a warship. This revolution arrived not in the grand naval theaters of Europe, but in the divided rivers of a nation at war with itself. The American Civil War became the unlikely crucible for a transformation so sudden and so absolute that it made every powerful ship of the line and every graceful clipper in the world instantly obsolete in the span of a single, bewildering afternoon. The age of wood was over. The age of iron had begun. The catalyst for this upheaval was a desperate act of innovation by the Confederate States Navy. Trapped by a stringent Union blockade and possessing almost no traditional navy, the South needed a weapon that could break the stranglehold. Their solution was to salvage the burned-out hull of the former U.S. Navy frigate USS Merrimack, which had been scuttled when the Federals abandoned the Gosport Navy Yard in Virginia. Instead of rebuilding it as a wooden warship, Confederate engineers conceived something entirely new. They encased the entire vessel in a sloping casemate built from thick layers of railroad iron, creating an impregnable shell. They then armed this floating fortress with a fearsome ram on its prow and 10 heavy guns. Rechristened the C.S.S. Virginia, this ungainly, smoke-belching monster was unlike anything ever seen on the water. It was an ironclad. When the Virginia steamed out into the Chesapeake Bay on March 8, 1862, it looked less like a ship and more like a barn roof that had somehow slipped into the water and caught fire. But its appearance was deceptive. The Union blockading squadron stationed at Hampton Roads, composed of powerful wooden sailing frigates like the U.S. Cumberland and USS Congress, initially viewed the strange vessel with curiosity. That curiosity quickly turned to horror as their most powerful broadsides, the kind that could shatter a ship of the line, simply bounced harmlessly off the Virginia's sloped iron sides with a loud, mocking clang. The Confederate ironclad was invulnerable. It methodically rammed and sank the Cumberland, then turned its guns on the Congress, which was forced to run aground and surrender. As night fell, the Virginia retreated, planning to finish off the rest of the Union fleet the next day. It had single-handedly destroyed the core of the North's blockade and thrown the entire U.S. Navy into a state of panic. In one afternoon, it had proven that every naval power on Earth had just wasted centuries of accumulated knowledge and tradition. Unbeknownst to the Confederates, however, their technological surprise was about to be met with one of their own. The Union, having received intelligence about the South's secret weapon, had rushed its own experimental ironclad into production. The USS Monitor, designed by the brilliant and eccentric Swedish engineer John Ericsson, was even more radical than the Virginia. Where the Confederate ship was a converted wooden hull, the Monitor was built from the keel up as an ironclad. It was a bizarre, almost surreal sight. A low, flat iron hull barely visible above the waterline, dominated by a single, revolving cylindrical turret in the center that housed two powerful 11-inch Dahlgren guns. Nicknamed a cheese box on a raft, the Monitor sacrificed everything seaworthiness, comfort, speed, for a single purpose: to be a stable, rotating gun platform that could engage the enemy from any direction. On the morning of March 9th, as the Virginia returned to complete its destruction, it was met by this strange new vessel. What followed was the first ever battle between ironclad warships, a 4-hour point-blank slugging match at Hampton Roads. The two ships circled each other, pounding away with their heavy guns. Solid shot roared from the Virginia's broadside batteries, only to slam into the Monitor's turret and ricochet wildly into the sky. The Monitor's turret would rotate, fire, then rotate away to reload in safety, a revolutionary tactic. For hours, the Iron Titans hammered each other to no apparent effect. The battle ended in a tactical draw, with neither ship able to inflict critical damage on the other, but the strategic outcome was crystal clear to every naval observer in the world. The sound of cannonballs harmlessly bouncing off iron plates was the sound of naval history turning a page. The mighty wooden navies of Britain and France, the pride of nations that had dominated the oceans for centuries, were suddenly and terrifyingly obsolete. A single, imperfect battle between two experimental vessels had instantly reset the global balance of naval power. Every admiralty on the planet now faced a terrifying and expensive truth: they had to start over. The true legacy of the ironclad, however, extended far beyond this first iconic duel. It fundamentally reshaped the very geography of the Civil War itself. The Union, quickly grasping the potential, embarked on a massive program to build a fleet of riverine ironclads, often called Pooke's turtles, after their designer Samuel Pooke. These shallow-draft, heavily armored gunboats could steam up the mighty Mississippi River and its tributaries, places where deep-draft ocean-going warships could never go. This allowed the North to project naval power deep into the heart of the Confederacy, turning rivers from protective barriers into highways for invasion. Union ironclads bombarded Confederate forts, supported army movements, and severed crucial supply lines. The capture of Vicksburg in 1863, a pivotal turning point in the war, was achieved in no small part due to the support of the Union's river ironclads. For the first time, a navy could directly influence a land campaign hundreds of miles from the sea, a strategic innovation that would echo through future conflicts. The ironclad had done more than just sink wooden ships. It had dissolved the ancient boundary between land and sea power, proving that a technological leap in ship design could alter the fate of a nation faster than any number of infantry charges across a muddy field. The thunderous clash of ironclads at Hampton Roads had signaled the end of wooden navies, but it was only the opening act in a far more profound industrial and strategic revolution. For the next 4 decades, naval architects engaged in a frantic dance of incremental improvements, adding thicker armor, more powerful guns, and increasingly sophisticated steam engines to their designs. Battleships became complex hybrids, sporting a confusing mix of heavy main guns for pounding enemy armor and a secondary battery of lighter, quicker-firing weapons to fend off the new threat of fast torpedo boats. This evolutionary path, however, had reached a point of diminishing returns. The fleet that won a battle would be a chaotic mixture of different classes, each with varying speeds and capabilities, making coordinated tactics a nightmare for admirals. The stage was set for a single, revolutionary design to sweep the board clean, and in 1906, Britain did exactly that with a ship so potent it rendered every other battleship on the planet obsolete the day it was launched. Its name was HMS Dreadnought, and it didn't just change naval warfare, it recalibrated the global balance of power. The genius of the Dreadnought was its breathtaking, almost ruthless simplicity. The guiding principle of its designer, Sir John "Jackie" Fisher, was to prioritize 2 things above all else: overwhelming firepower at long range and the speed to dictate the terms of any engagement. To achieve this, Fisher made a radical decision. He eliminated the traditional secondary battery entirely. Instead, the Dreadnought was armed with 10 12-inch guns and 10 massive rifles of identical caliber, mounted in 5 twin turrets. This all-big gun armament meant that at extreme ranges, where the smaller guns of older battleships were useless, the Dreadnought could unleash a coordinated volley of immense destructive power. For the first time, a captain could spot the splashes of his shells falling around a distant enemy and correct the aim of his entire main battery at once, a concept known as salvo firing. This turned naval gunnery from an art into a science, and it meant any pre-Dreadnought battleship caught within its range was simply outclassed, a sitting duck waiting for a hammer blow it could not return in kind. But raw firepower was only half the equation. To control the engagement, the Dreadnought needed to be faster than any potential rival. Here, Fisher introduced his second masterstroke. It was the first major warship in the world to be powered by revolutionary steam turbines instead of the traditional reciprocating steam engines. The difference was transformative. While the old piston engines vibrated terribly, limiting aiming accuracy, and were complex and inefficient, the new turbines were smoother, more reliable, and delivered far more power. The Dreadnought could sustain a top speed of 21 knots, making it not only the most heavily armed ship afloat but also one of the fastest. This combination was devastating. It could run down any ship it could outgun and outgun any ship it could not outrun. Its very design was a statement of intent. The future of naval combat would be fought at speed and at distance, and Britain now held a monopoly on that future. The psychological and political impact of the Dreadnought's launch was even more profound than its technological shock. Overnight, it triggered the most intense naval arms race in history. Every capital ship in every navy, including the entire mighty British Royal Navy, was instantly downgraded to a second-rate vessel. The race to build a modern fleet was reset to zero. This played directly into the grand strategic ambitions of Kaiser Wilhelm II's Germany. Eager to secure his place in the sun and challenge British global hegemony, Wilhelm had long dreamed of a powerful high seas fleet. The Dreadnought presented him with a unique opportunity. Britain may have had a lead in numbers of old battleships, but now everyone was starting from the same line. Germany, through its immense industrial might, its world-leading steel and munitions factories, into constructing its own class of dreadnoughts. The British public fed a daily diet of jingoistic newspaper headlines about the German threat, demanded their government respond. "We want 8 and we won't wait" became a popular rallying cry, leading to a frantic British building program to maintain its cherished two-power standard, the policy that the Royal Navy should be as strong as the next two largest navies combined. This was no longer just a competition of ships. It was a clash of national prides and imperial destinies, fought in the shipyards of Newcastle and Kiel. The Dreadnought became the ultimate symbol of a nation's technological prowess, economic strength, and global ambition. These leviathans were staggeringly expensive, consuming a huge portion of national budgets and diverting resources that could have been spent on armies, social programs, or infrastructure. This massive financial commitment forced a strategic realignment. For Germany, a traditionally land-based power, building a fleet to rival Britain's meant making a conscious choice to invest in naval power at the expense of its continental army, a decision that deeply alarmed its ally, Austria-Hungary, and altered the complex web of European alliances. For Britain, an island nation whose survival and empire depended entirely on command of the sea, the Dreadnought race was an existential struggle. The security of its global trade routes and the very lifelines of its empire were at stake. The dreadnoughts themselves, these colossal, sleek grey embodiments of national will, rarely saw combat. Their greatest power was not in what they did, but in what they represented the threat of their potential use. This was the ultimate expression of deterrence. The British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet became two immense, cautious boxers, circling each other in the North Sea, each aware that a single decisive battle could win or lose the war in an afternoon. Their existence created a tense, fragile stalemate. The catastrophic potential of a fleet action was so great that both sides hesitated to commit their prized assets fully, leading to a long standoff that defined the naval war after the initial skirmishes. The Dreadnought's legacy, therefore, is a complex and sobering one. It was the pinnacle of pre-war battleship design, a masterpiece of naval architecture that rightly inspired awe. Yet it was also a key catalyst for the toxic atmosphere of mistrust and competition that made the Great War inevitable. It proved once and for all that a single ship's blueprint could do more than win a battle. It could force empires to mortgage their futures and set the world on a collision course, demonstrating that the shape of a hull could cast a shadow long enough to darken an entire continent. Yet even as the great dreadnoughts glowered at each other across the North Sea, a new and far more revolutionary naval concept was being tested, one that would ultimately make their colossal gun turrets and thick armor belts seem as antiquated as the Trireme's bronze ram. The premise was deceptively simple, yet its implications were earth-shattering. If an airplane could scout for the fleet or even drop a bomb, what if you could launch entire squadrons of them from a ship that could carry them anywhere on the globe? The idea of the aircraft carrier was born not from a desire to replace the battleship, but to support it. Its earliest incarnations were comically impractical converted colliers or battlecruisers with flight decks slapped on top, little more than floating platforms for a handful of flimsy biplanes. For traditional naval commanders weaned on the gospel of the big gun, these early carriers were seen as auxiliaries, useful for reconnaissance or spotting fall of shot for the mighty dreadnoughts, but never as the central striking force of a fleet. They were the eyes of the Navy, not its fists. This perception was about to be obliterated in a single, stunning blow. The catalyst was Japan's audacious surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The instrument of this destruction was not a fleet of battleships steaming into range, but 6 Japanese aircraft carriers that had secretly crossed the Pacific undetected. From their decks, in 2 devastating waves, soared hundreds of bombers and torpedo planes that shattered the U.S. Pacific Fleet at anchor. In a few hours, the battleship U.S.S. Arizona was destroyed, the Oklahoma capsized, and nearly every other capital ship in the harbor was damaged or sunk. The attack was a brutal and unequivocal lesson in a new form of warfare. It demonstrated that air power, launched from a mobile base hundreds of miles away, could deliver a knockout punch to the most powerful surface fleet without the opposing ships ever coming within sight of each other. Pearl Harbor announced to the world that the aircraft carrier was no longer a supporting actor. It was now the star of the show, and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean had just become its stage. The ultimate test of this new paradigm came just 6 months later, at a remote atoll northwest of Hawaii called Midway. After their success at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese fleet sought to deliver a final, decisive blow to the wounded U.S. Navy by luring its remaining aircraft carriers into a trap and destroying them. The Americans, having broken Japanese naval codes, knew the plan and turned the trap on its head. What followed was not a traditional naval engagement of ships trading broadsides, but a complex dance of search planes, scout reports, and fateful decisions made in crowded command centers. The opposing fleets never saw each other. The entire battle was fought by aircraft soaring from the flight decks of their floating bases. In a matter of minutes, the tide of the war turned. American dauntless dive bombers, arriving over the Japanese fleet at the perfect moment, found the decks of all 4 enemy carriers crowded with planes being refueled and rearmed. Plummeting almost vertically out of the sun, they dropped their bombs with devastating precision. The resulting fires and secondary explosions sank all 4 of Japan's premier carriers, the Akagi, Koga, Soryu, and Haryu, in a single day. The loss of these ships, and more importantly, their highly experienced air crews, was a blow from which the Imperial Japanese Navy never recovered. Midway proved that the carrier was not just a weapon, but the most critical asset in the entire fleet, whose loss or survival could determine the fate of nations and the course of a global war. This new reality fundamentally altered American strategy in the Pacific. The United States embarked on a staggering industrial effort, launching new Essex-class carriers at a rate the Japanese could never hope to match. These ships became the spearhead of a new strategy called island hopping. Instead of challenging every Japanese-held island in a bloody slog, the U.S. would use its carrier task forces to isolate and bypass strongholds, leaping from one key island to the next. The carriers provided a movable shield of air cover, protecting invasion fleets and providing close air support for Marines hitting the beaches. Then, once an island was secured, its airfields would allow land-based aircraft to extend the range of American air power, and the carriers could move on to the next objective. This entire campaign was made possible by another critical innovation in carrier design, the armored flight deck. While Japanese carriers had wooden decks that were highly vulnerable to bomb penetration, many American carriers featured armored decks that could absorb bomb hits and remain operational. This resilience meant a U.S. carrier could survive attacks that would cripple or sink its opponent, making the American carrier fleet not only larger, but also far more durable and effective in the long, grueling campaign across the ocean. The aircraft carrier had achieved what no previous warship could even conceive. It made the ocean itself irrelevant as a barrier. No longer were navies limited to attacking what they could reach with a cannon shot from the sea. A carrier task force could project power 1,000 miles inland, making every coastline, even of a continent-sized nation, potentially vulnerable. It transformed the Navy from a service that controlled the sea into one that could control the land from the sea. The sheer reach of this power was demonstrated in the war's final stages, as U.S. carriers sailed with impunity right up to the Japanese home islands, their aircraft pummeling factories, airfields, and cities in a relentless campaign that brought the war directly to the enemy's heartland. The carrier had effectively shrunk the world, turning the greatest expanse of water on Earth into a convenient highway for American air power and proving, beyond any doubt, that the future of global influence would belong to whichever nation could build, deploy, and master these floating sovereign territories of steel and air power. But the concept of a vessel that could slip beneath the waves, invisible to its prey, represented a far more radical break from thousands of years of naval tradition. For centuries, naval power had been about presence, the intimidating silhouette of a ship of the line, the proud flag flying from a carrier's mast. The submarine, by its very nature, inverted this principle. Its power was derived not from being seen, but from its utter and complete absence, from the psychological terror of an enemy that could be anywhere and nowhere at once. This shift began not with nuclear reactors, but in the cramped, diesel-electric confines of the German U-boat. During the First World War, Germany unleashed its Unterseeboot in a desperate attempt to cut the maritime lifelines that sustained the British Isles. Britain, an island empire, was uniquely vulnerable. Its population and its war machine were utterly dependent on a constant stream of merchant ships bringing food, raw materials, and troops from across the globe. The U-boats attacked this lifeline with a terrifying new tactic: unrestricted submarine warfare. They would surface without warning, often using their deck gun to conserve precious torpedoes, sink the vessel, and submerge before any armed escort could respond. The effect was not just the loss of ships and cargo, it was the installation of a deep, pervasive dread in every merchant sailor who ventured into the Atlantic. The ocean itself, once a highway, had become a hunting ground. This psychological and economic pressure reached its terrifying apex in the Second World War during the Battle of the Atlantic. German Admiral Karl Dönitz perfected the U-boat strategy using coordinated wolf packs. Instead of operating alone, submarines would spread out across the convoy routes. When one U-boat spotted a target, it would shadow it silently while radioing the position to headquarters, which would then vector in other submarines from the pack. Under the cover of darkness, the entire pack would surface and attack simultaneously, overwhelming the escorts and creating chaos. The losses for the Allies were staggering. At the height of the battle in early 1943, ships were being sunk faster than they could be built. Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. The fate of the entire Allied effort hinged on a technological and tactical cat-and-mouse game fought between invisible hunters and the convoys they stalked. The eventual Allied victory was achieved not by destroying the concept of the submarine, but by developing new technologies to detect them like sonar and radar, and by building escort carriers to provide air cover across the entire ocean. The submarine had proven that a relatively cheap, stealthy vessel could threaten the existence of a global empire, forcing it to expend immense resources on defense and forever changing the calculus of naval warfare. The true transformation of the submarine from a tactical raider into a strategic, world-altering weapon came with the harnessing of the atom. The great limitation of the diesel-electric submarine was its need for air. It had to surface regularly to run its diesel engines and recharge the batteries that powered it underwater, making it vulnerable to detection and attack. The nuclear reactor changed everything. By using a small, controlled nuclear fission reaction to create steam and turn turbines, a submarine could generate virtually limitless power without ever needing oxygen. This single innovation gave birth to the concept of true submerged endurance. The first of these incredible machines, the USS Nautilus, famously signaled underway on nuclear power in 1955, and just a few years later achieved the heretofore impossible: a transit beneath the North Pole ice cap, a realm no surface ship could ever penetrate. The nuclear-powered attack submarine became the ultimate hunter, faster underwater than most surface ships, able to stay on patrol for months, limited only by the crew's food supplies and morale. But it was the marriage of this endless propulsion with the intercontinental ballistic missile that truly elevated the submarine to a singular role in global politics. The ballistic missile submarine, or boomer, became the most survivable leg of the nuclear triad. Bombers on airfields and missiles in fixed silos could be targeted in a first strike. A boomer, however, is virtually invulnerable when deployed into the silent, vast darkness of the deep ocean. It is a mobile, undetectable nuclear arsenal capable of lurking off an enemy's coast for months, a constant, invisible sentinel. This creates the foundation of the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. A nation knows that even if it suffers a devastating nuclear first strike that wipes out its land-based forces, at least one of these hidden leviathans will survive to unleash a retaliatory strike of apocalyptic proportions. The submarine's shape, a perfectly streamlined teardrop hull designed to slide through the water with minimal noise and resistance, is therefore the physical embodiment of this chilling deterrent. It is not a ship designed for glorious battle. It is a weapon designed to never be used, whose entire purpose is to ensure its own existence makes its use unthinkable. The most powerful ships, the ones that truly keep the peace through a balance of terror, are the ones we never see, a silent, enduring testament to the idea that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in a visible display of force, but in the promise of an invisible and ultimate response. Yet for all the terrifying destructive power of the ballistic missile submarine, a vessel designed to ensure a fragile peace through the threat of mutual annihilation, the true architect of the modern world operates in plain sight, a behemoth of breathtaking scale and mundane purpose. If the Dreadnought was the symbol of imperial might and the carrier the instrument of power projection, then the unassuming container ship is the undeniable engine of globalization itself. Its story begins not with a naval architect or an admiral, but with a frustrated North Carolina trucking magnate named Malcolm McLean. In the 1950s, watching longshoremen slowly and expensively manually load and unload countless crates, barrels, and boxes from a ship, he had a simple, revolutionary idea. What if you didn't load the cargo? What if you simply loaded the entire truck trailer, then later just the box itself, onto the ship? This concept of intermodalism, a sealed container that could move seamlessly from a ship to a truck to a train without its contents ever being touched, was so brilliantly simple it would go on to utterly rewire the entire planet's economy. The true genius of McLean's vision was its focus on standardization. He didn't just invent a container, he fought to establish a global standard for its size and the locking mechanisms that would secure it. The resulting 20-foot and 40-foot long steel boxes, known as 20-foot equivalent units or TUs, became the universal Lego bricks of global commerce. This standardization was the key that unlocked everything else. Ports could now be redesigned around these uniform boxes. The chaotic, muscle-bound docks of the past, swarming with gangs of longshoremen, were replaced with vast, automated container terminals. Giant gantry cranes, moving on rails like mechanical dinosaurs, now pluck containers from a ship's deck with robotic precision, placing them directly onto waiting trucks or train cars in a dizzying, non-stop ballet of logistics. A process that once took a week to unload a ship now takes less than a day. This radical efficiency did one thing above all else. It annihilated the cost of moving goods across an ocean. Shipping expenses plummeted by over 90%, transforming international trade from a luxury for high-value items into a practical reality for virtually everything. The design of the ship itself evolved in a relentless pursuit of scale and efficiency to serve this new system. The first container ship, McLean's Ideal X, was a converted tanker that could carry a mere 58 containers. Today's largest container vessels, like the awe-inspiring giants of the Evergreen and Maersk lines, are among the largest moving objects ever built by humankind. Stretching over a quarter-mile long and rising nearly 200 feet from keel to bridge, these ships can carry over 24,000 TUs. To grasp that scale, imagine a train long enough to stretch from New York City to Philadelphia, entirely loaded with packed containers. Their hulls are vast, rectangular blocks, optimized for maximum cubic capacity. Their decks a sprawling cityscape of stacked metal boxes. They are powered by a single, massive diesel engine, often as tall as a 4-story building, that turns a propeller the size of a suburban house, pushing these floating mountains at a steady, fuel-efficient pace across the world's sea lanes. Every curve and line of these ships is dictated not by naval combat, but by the economics of fuel consumption per container, a dry statistic that nonetheless dictates the flow of global wealth. This unprecedented low-cost logistics system made entirely new economic models not just possible, but inevitable. It enabled the rise of just-in-time manufacturing, where components from a dozen different countries can arrive at a factory within hours of when they are needed, eliminating the cost and space required for vast warehouses. It allowed companies to disaggregate production, sourcing the cheapest possible labor and materials from anywhere on Earth. A smartphone might be designed in California, contain chips from Taiwan, a screen from South Korea, be assembled in Vietnam using rare earth minerals from Africa, and be shipped to a consumer in Europe, all for a fraction of the cost of localized production. This complex, interwoven dance is entirely choreographed by the steady, reliable movement of container ships. They created the supply chains that built modern China into the world's workshop, connecting its massive manufacturing hubs to every market on the planet. The container ship didn't just carry goods to China. It carried the very blueprint of its economic miracle, delivering raw materials and exporting finished products on a scale that has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty and reshaped global geopolitics. The humble container ship's impact is arguably more profound and far-reaching than that of any warship in history. Armies can conquer territory, but they cannot weave economies together. A carrier battle group can project power, but it cannot make a foreign-made product affordable on a store shelf in Middle America. The container ship accomplished something no military force ever could. It built a deeply interconnected, interdependent global economy. Its influence is visible in the affordable electronics in our homes, the fresh fruit available year-round in our supermarkets, and the very clothes on our backs. It has made the world smaller, richer, and more accessible, but it has also made it more fragile, as the delicate web of supply chains can be snapped by a pandemic, a war, or a single ship stuck in a canal. The container ship is the quiet, unacknowledged foundation of our modern way of life, a testament to the idea that the most powerful force shaping human destiny is not the weapon of war, but the simple, relentless, and revolutionary efficiency of a standardized steel box. Yet, even as the massive container ship solidified its role as the backbone of a globalized economy, naval strategists were already turning their attention to a very different and far more fragmented maritime environment. The end of the Cold War and the rise of asymmetric threats created a new and complex battlefield not on the high seas, but in the crowded, shallow, and politically fraught waters close to shore. This littoral zone, the area where land and sea meet, became the new front line, a space where traditional, massive blue water warships like aircraft carriers and destroyers were as out of place as a bull in a china shop. Their deep drafts risked running aground. Their sophisticated sensor systems were overwhelmed by the acoustic clutter of coastal traffic, and their immense cost and firepower were poorly suited for chasing pirates in speedboats or interdicting drug smugglers. The United States Navy, in particular, found itself needing a new tool for this new era, leading to one of the most ambitious and controversial naval projects of the 21st century, the Littoral Combat Ship, or LCS. The core philosophy behind the LCS was a radical departure from centuries of naval design tradition. Instead of building a single, massively armed vessel meant to dominate every scenario through overwhelming force, the LCS was conceived as a flexible, nimble, and affordable platform. Its entire identity was built around three key attributes. First, its shallow draft, allowing it to operate in waters as shallow as 20 feet, meant it could venture into river deltas, archipelagos, and harbors that were no-go zones for the rest of the fleet. Second, it was designed for breathtaking speed, capable of sprinting at over 40 knots using powerful water jets or gas turbines, enabling it to chase down fast-moving threats. But its most innovative and ultimately most challenging feature was its modularity. The LCS was envisioned as a seafaring Swiss Army knife. It wouldn't have a fixed set of weapons. Instead, it would be a bare-bones seaframe that could be quickly fitted with one of several specialized mission modules. A single ship could be reconfigured in a matter of days from an anti-submarine warfare platform, complete with helicopters and torpedoes, to a mine countermeasures vessel to clear vital sea lanes, or to a surface warfare package to tackle swarms of small attack craft. This concept of modular adaptability was a direct response to the fuzzy and unpredictable nature of modern low-intensity conflicts. Imagine a scenario off the coast of Southeast Asia, where a suspicious cargo vessel, suspected of transporting illicit materials, is hiding amongst hundreds of other legitimate merchant ships and fishing trawlers. A towering Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer would be too conspicuous and too constrained by its deep hull to effectively investigate. An LCS, however, could slip into the area quietly, using its speed to quickly respond to intelligence reports. It could launch a Seahawk helicopter or unmanned aerial vehicles from its large flight deck to scan the horizon, and then dispatch rigid-hull inflatable boats with Special Forces teams to board and inspect the suspect ship. In another scenario, in the strategic Strait of Hormuz, where small, agile Iranian fast attack craft pose a constant threat to commercial shipping, the LCS's high speed and its surface warfare module, featuring a 30mm gun system and surface-to-surface missiles, would allow it to effectively serve as a guardian, deterring and defending against swarm attacks. However, the path from innovative concept to effective reality proved extraordinarily difficult. The push for extreme speed and light displacement led to compromises in the hull's strength and seakeeping abilities. The complex networking required to make the modular systems plug and play encountered significant software and hardware integration problems, meaning the promised quick changeovers between missions often took far longer than anticipated. Most critically, the original vision of a low-cost, adaptable vessel ran into the hard realities of defense procurement, with costs per ship rising significantly from initial estimates. These challenges sparked intense debate about whether the LCS was a revolutionary step forward or a flawed compromise trying to do too many things at once. Despite these growing pains, the Littoral Combat Ship program signifies a crucial and enduring strategic truth. It represents a conscious shift from preparing for a single, massive peer-level naval war to preparing for a constant global presence in the messy, ambiguous, and politically sensitive green water zones where most of today's maritime security challenges actually occur. It acknowledges that the future of naval influence may not always be about winning a major battle, but about maintaining stability, ensuring the free flow of commerce, and building partnerships through persistent, adaptable presence. The very existence of the LCS, with its distinctive, sleek, and fast-moving profile, demonstrates that naval strategy is in a constant state of evolution. It proves that even in an age of cyber warfare and space-based assets, the physical design of a ship, its draft, its speed, its configuration remains a direct and powerful response to the ever-changing nature of global threats and the enduring need for empires, however they are defined, to protect their interests wherever the water meets the land. While the world's attention has often been focused on the crowded shipping lanes of the tropics or the strategic straits of Southeast Asia, a quiet but monumental shift has been taking place at the top of the world, driven not by geopolitical conflict but by a changing climate. For centuries, the Arctic Ocean has been a frozen, impassable frontier, its sea ice a formidable white barrier that defied even the most powerful conventional ships. But as global temperatures rise, that ice is receding at an alarming rate, and the map is being redrawn in real time. This unprecedented environmental transformation is unlocking sea routes that were once the stuff of fantasy, and a specialized class of vessel, long overlooked, is suddenly stepping into a role of immense strategic importance, the icebreaker. This is not a ship designed for battle, but for brute force endurance, and its unique capabilities are turning a once inaccessible wilderness into a new arena of economic and national ambition. The engineering behind a true icebreaker is a marvel of focused power. Unlike a standard ship, which is designed to slice through water, an icebreaker is built to climb onto, crush, and clear solid ice. Its hull is not just reinforced, it is a specific shape, often resembling a sloped spoon or a rounded bathtub. This allows the bow to ride up onto the ice shelf, using the ship's immense weight to crack it from above. The hull is also made from incredibly thick, high-tensile steel, often layered with special polymer coatings to reduce friction and prevent ice from clinging to the sides. But the true heart of the icebreaker lies in its propulsion system. These vessels are equipped with some of the most powerful diesel, electric, or even nuclear-powered engines on the planet, delivering massive torque to reinforced propellers that are protected within a special nozzle to prevent ice damage. Some of the most advanced designs also feature azimuth thrusters propellers that can rotate 360 degrees, providing exceptional maneuverability in the tight, chaotic jumble of broken ice. This combination of a strengthened, uniquely shaped hull and overwhelming power allows these ships to methodically chew a path through ice several meters thick, creating a clear channel for other, less capable vessels to follow. The economic incentives for mastering this harsh environment are staggering. The opening of Arctic sea routes promises to dramatically shorten global shipping journeys. The Northern Sea Route, which runs along Russia's northern coast, can cut the transit time from East Asia to Western Europe by nearly 2 weeks compared to the traditional route through the Suez Canal. This represents a monumental saving in fuel costs, crew time, and canal fees, potentially reshaping global logistics. Furthermore, the Arctic is believed to hold up to 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas and 13% of its untapped oil, alongside vast deposits of rare earth minerals essential for modern technology. For nations and corporations, the Arctic is not just a new route. It's a treasure trove of resources, and the icebreaker is the key that unlocks the vault. No nation has understood and acted upon this reality more decisively than Russia. With the longest Arctic coastline of any country, Russia has treated its northern frontier as a strategic priority for decades, a commitment that has only intensified with the melting ice. The Russian state has invested billions in building the world's most powerful fleet of icebreakers, a fleet that includes the only nuclear-powered icebreakers in existence. These leviathans, like the 50,000-ton Arctica, are essentially floating power stations. Their nuclear reactors provide them with the endurance to operate for years without refueling, allowing them to ram through the polar ice cap deep into the winter months, long after other ships have been forced to retreat. This formidable capability is not just for show, it is the bedrock of a national strategy to control and commercialize the Northern Sea Route. Russia mandates that all vessels traveling the route must be accompanied by a Russian icebreaker for a fee and must also accept a Russian pilot on board. They have also reopened Soviet-era military bases along the coast, establishing a network of airfields, ports, and monitoring stations to oversee maritime traffic. This calculated move represents a profound new form of empire building. Russia isn't conquering new territories through military invasion. It is establishing de facto control through a demonstration of indispensable capability and infrastructure. By being the only nation with the hardware and the will to keep the route open for the longest possible season, Russia is positioning itself as the gatekeeper to the Arctic. Shipping companies seeking the economic advantages of the shorter northern passage have no choice but to play by Moscow's rules. This grants Russia immense economic leverage, collecting tolls and fees, and even greater strategic influence, as it can effectively control the flow of goods between Asia and Europe along this new corridor. The icebreaker in this context is more than a ship. It is a tool of soft power and economic sovereignty, allowing a nation to quietly expand its sphere of influence not with missiles, but with a reinforced hull and a nuclear reactor. The rapid changes in the Arctic have triggered a quiet but intense scramble among other northern nations. Canada, with its vast Arctic archipelago, is investing in new patrol ships and icebreakers to assert its sovereignty over the Northwest Passage, which it claims as internal waters. The United States, whose icebreaker fleet has languished, is finally pushing to build new heavy icebreakers through the Coast Guard, recognizing that its access to the region and ability to project presence depends on it. Even non-Arctic states with economic stakes like China have declared themselves near-Arctic states and are building their own ice-capable research and logistics vessels, the Zhu Long or Snow Dragon, to ensure they have a seat at the table. This isn't a race marked by dramatic battles. It is a slow, methodical, and expensive competition of shipbuilding and infrastructure development. The goal is not to win a war, but to secure a claim, to have the ability to operate, research, and profit in a region that is becoming increasingly central to the world's economic and environmental future. The nations that can go where others cannot, that can endure where others turn back, will be the ones to write the rules for this new blue ocean. The icebreaker, therefore, stands as a powerful symbol for the 21st century, demonstrating that in an era of complex global challenges, sometimes the most strategic vessel is the one that creates the path itself. But what if the ultimate expression of naval power isn't about being seen at all, but about disappearing completely? For millennia, a ship's imposing presence was its greatest asset. The towering castles of a galleon, the long lines of cannon on a ship of the line, the massive flight deck of a carrier. These were all designed to project an image of undeniable strength. The modern stealth destroyer, however, represents a philosophical revolution in naval design. It operates on a completely different principle, that in an age of hypersensitive sensors and global satellite surveillance, the most powerful ship is the one that cannot be found. This isn't about adding more armor or bigger guns. It's about rethinking the very geometry of a vessel to cheat physics and vanish from the enemy's perception. The most striking example of this new philosophy is the U.S. Navy's Zumwalt-class destroyer. To the eye, it looks less like a traditional warship and more like a dark, angular origami sculpture that has somehow been folded into a seafaring form. Every single line and surface on the ship has a calculated purpose. Its sides slope dramatically inward. Its deck is clear of the traditional clutter of radar masts and exposed weapons, and its hull is shaped like a knife's edge to slice through the water while minimizing its wake. This bizarre, futuristic appearance isn't an aesthetic choice, it's a functional one. All those sharp, clean angles are designed to scatter incoming radar waves, reflecting them away from the source instead of directly back to it. The ship is also coated in radar-absorbent materials, a special composite that soaks up radar energy like a sponge, converting it into tiny amounts of heat that dissipate harmlessly. The result is a radar signature that is phenomenally small, on an enemy's radar screen, a 180-meter-long, 15,000-ton warship might appear as a tiny blip no larger than a small fishing boat, or it might not appear at all. This radical reduction in detectability fundamentally changes how such a ship can be used. A traditional destroyer operates as part of a protective screen for a carrier group, its powerful radar and missiles forming a defensive bubble. The stealth destroyer, by contrast, is designed for independent forward operations. It can slip undetected deep into contested waters, lurking dangerously close to a hostile coastline. From this invisible vantage point, it becomes a devastatingly effective intelligence gatherer and a precision strike platform. Its advanced sensors can peer deep into enemy territory, painting a detailed picture of air defenses, command centers, and troop movements, all while remaining a ghost. And if the order is given, it can unleash its own form of lightning from the shadows. The Zumwalt class was originally designed around two long-range advanced gun systems, which could fire precision-guided rocket-assisted projectiles over the horizon to strike targets 100 miles inland with pinpoint accuracy. While that particular gun system faced challenges, the concept remains. A stealth destroyer can deliver a devastating first blow from a position of complete surprise, crippling an enemy's defenses before they even know they are under attack. It turns the ocean into a place of shadows and uncertainty for an adversary, where any faint radar contact could be a harmless trawler or a multi-billion-dollar warship about to unleash hell. This leap in technology is the direct culmination of centuries of naval innovation, but it inverts the traditional goals. For thousands of years, shipwrights focused on making vessels faster, tougher, or more heavily armed. The stealth destroyer represents a shift where the primary armor is not steel plate, but information control. Its most critical asset is its data, the information it gathers from the enemy while denying the enemy any information about itself. In a world saturated with drones, satellites, and long-range sensors, the ability to hide in plain sight, to be present without being perceived, confers a tactical advantage that is arguably more potent than raw firepower. A fleet of traditional ships announces its presence and intention from hundreds of miles away, allowing an enemy to prepare. A single stealth destroyer introduces doubt and paralysis, forcing an opponent to question every sensor reading and waste immense resources searching for a threat that may already be inside their defensive perimeter. It proves that in the 21st century, the most decisive naval battles may not be won by the fleet that wins the exchange of missiles, but by the ship that wins the invisible electronic game of hide and seek long before the first shot is ever fired. Imagine a warship that never grows tired, a patrol vessel that never needs to rotate its crew, a minesweeper that feels no fear. This is the promise of the autonomous vessel, a concept that seeks to remove the most vulnerable and limiting component in any naval equation, the human being. For thousands of years, the design of every ship, from the Viking longship to the nuclear aircraft carrier, has been fundamentally constrained by the need to support and protect the people on board. Every decision, from the size of the galley to the height of the freeboard, has been made with human needs in mind. But what if you could strip all of that away? The result would be a radical reimagining of the ship itself, transforming it from a habitat into a pure, unadulterated tool. The advantages are immediately obvious and strategically profound. An autonomous warship, guided by sophisticated artificial intelligence and a suite of sensors, could remain on station for months or even years, limited only by its mechanical endurance and fuel supply. It wouldn't need to return to port for crew rest, resupply of food, or morale leave. This creates a paradigm of persistent presence that is simply impossible for a manned vessel. A nation could maintain a constant, invisible watch over a strategic choke point like the Strait of Hormuz or the South China Sea, without ever exposing a single sailor to danger. The cost savings would be enormous, not just in salaries and benefits, but in the entire massive infrastructure required to support a crew life support systems. Berthing, mess decks, and medical facilities could all be eliminated or drastically reduced, allowing the ship's size and weight to be dedicated entirely to its mission payload: more weapons, more fuel, more sensors. This shift is already underway, not with massive destroyers, but with smaller, experimental craft that are serving as the proof of concept for a robotic navy. The U.S. Navy's Sea Hunter program, for instance, features a sleek, futuristic trimaran design that looks like it sailed out of a science fiction film. Without a crew, its hull can be optimized for efficiency and stealth, not comfort. It's designed to track the quietest of enemy submarines for thousands of miles across the Pacific, a monotonous and demanding task that is perfect for an AI's relentless focus. Similarly, autonomous drones are being developed for the incredibly dangerous task of mine countermeasures. Instead of sending a delicate ship and its vulnerable crew into a minefield, a mothership could launch a swarm of smaller, autonomous vessels to systematically sweep an area, identifying and neutralizing threats with cold, mechanical precision. This not only saves lives but also allows the operation to proceed far more quickly and aggressively. The logical and most controversial extension of this technology is fully autonomous combat. The idea of an AI making a lethal decision without a human in the loop raises profound ethical and legal questions that the world is only beginning to grapple with. Could a machine reliably distinguish between an enemy warship, a neutral merchant vessel, and a fishing boat in the fog of war? The potential for catastrophic error is immense. Yet the tactical allure is equally powerful. In a high-intensity conflict against a sophisticated adversary, the battle would be waged at speeds far beyond human reaction time. Swarms of autonomous attack boats could coordinate complex maneuvers instantaneously, overwhelming enemy defenses with a synchronized assault that no human commander could hope to counter. They could be used as sacrificial shields, drawing fire to protect a high-value manned aircraft carrier, a tactic that would be unthinkable if sailors were on board. Beyond the military sphere, the impact of autonomous shipping on global commerce could be even more transformative. The global shipping industry is plagued by the high costs and complex logistics of crewing massive container ships. An autonomous freighter could sail the most efficient route regardless of weather, pushed to the very limits of its design without concerns for crew safety or comfort. It could operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never slowing down. This would further drive down the cost of transported goods and could help alleviate the global shortage of qualified merchant mariners. These ships would likely look very different from today's designs. Without the need for a superstructure housing the bridge and crew quarters, the entire deck could be a flat, uninterrupted plane for containers, and the hull could be optimized for cargo capacity and fuel efficiency alone. The path to this autonomous future is not without its obstacles. The technology for fail-safe navigation in crowded, complex waterways is still being refined. The cybersecurity risks are terrifying. A hacked autonomous fleet could be turned into a weapon by an adversary or simply held for ransom, bringing global trade to a standstill. And the international regulatory framework for such vessels is still a blank page, but the direction of travel is clear. We are moving toward an ocean where the most common vessels may have no lights in their portholes at night because there are no portholes at all. This represents the latest and perhaps most profound evolution in the relationship between ship design and empire. It suggests a future where naval and economic power is not just projected by ships, but by the sophisticated algorithms that guide them, allowing nations and corporations to exert influence across the globe with a permanence and reach that would have been unimaginable to every admiral and shipwright who came before. Yet, even as autonomous vessels promise a future of unprecedented efficiency and reach, a more immediate and pressing challenge is steering the entire shipping industry toward a more sustainable course. For centuries, the smell of the sea was mingled with the acrid smoke of burning coal, and later, the thick exhaust of heavy fuel oil. The maritime industry has long operated as the largely invisible backbone of globalization, but its environmental footprint is now under intense and deserved scrutiny. It's a staggering reality that if the global shipping fleet were a country, it would rank among the top 10 largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. This sobering fact, coupled with rising public awareness and stringent new international regulations, has ignited a race not for naval supremacy, but for environmental salvation. The new frontier of naval architecture is no longer about building bigger or faster, but about building smarter and cleaner, transforming the very definition of power from one of sheer force to one of sustainable endurance. This green revolution is being driven by a powerful combination of carrot and stick. On one hand, the International Maritime Organization, the United Nations agency that regulates shipping, has set ambitious targets to cut the industry's carbon emissions in half by 2050 and to reduce sulfur oxide emissions by over 80%. These are not mere suggestions, they are legally binding mandates that are forcing shipowners and builders to innovate or face being shut out of global trade. On the other hand, there is a powerful economic incentive. Fuel is the single largest operational cost for any shipping company. A more efficient vessel isn't just a greener one, it's a more profitable one. This alignment of ecological necessity and financial pragmatism is fueling an explosion of creativity in ship design, leading to solutions that would have seemed like science fiction just a generation ago. One of the most promising avenues is the return of a very old technology, the sail. But this is not a simple revival of the majestic canvas of the clipper ship era. Modern wind-assisted propulsion is a high-tech affair, leveraging advanced materials and computer modeling to harness the wind's power with incredible efficiency. Imagine a massive cargo ship equipped with towering, solid wing sails that look like aircraft wings mounted vertically on the deck. These rigid sails are equipped with sensors that constantly monitor wind speed and direction, automatically adjusting their angle to maximize thrust and minimize drag. Other innovative designs include giant, spinning rotor cylinders known as Flettner rotors, which use the Magnus effect, the same principle that puts curve on a baseball to generate forward push from the wind. When the wind is favorable, these systems can significantly reduce the engine load, leading to fuel savings of 10 to 20% on certain routes. It's a beautiful synergy of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge technology, allowing modern freighters to once again ride the breezes that first carried explorers across the oceans. Alongside wind, the search for cleaner burning fuels is reshaping engine rooms around the world. The frontrunner in this transition is liquefied natural gas, or LNG. When burned, LNG produces virtually no sulfur oxide emissions, dramatically reduces nitrogen oxides, and cuts carbon dioxide output by about 20% compared to traditional marine fuels. The newest generation of container ships and cruise liners are being built as dual-fuel vessels, capable of switching between LNG and conventional fuel, offering flexibility and a significantly cleaner operational profile. The next step beyond LNG is the exploration of truly carbon-neutral fuels like green methanol, produced using renewable energy or even hydrogen. these fuels promise a future where the only emission from a ship stack could be water vapor. The challenge is no longer the engine technology itself, but building the global infrastructure to produce, transport, and store these new fuels at ports around the world, a logistical puzzle that is itself driving a new wave of investment and innovation. Perhaps the most holistic approach to green shipping is the move towards hybrid propulsion and energy efficiency. Much like a hybrid car, these systems combine traditional engines with battery banks and sophisticated energy management software. The batteries can power the ship for short periods at port, eliminating the constant, dirty idling of auxiliary engines that has long plagued port cities with air pollution. They can also provide a powerful boost of extra power during maneuvering or in heavy seas, allowing the main engines to operate at their most efficient cruising speed. This is paired with a relentless focus on reducing a ship's overall energy demand through smarter hull designs coated with special silicones to reduce friction, more efficient propellers, and even air lubrication systems that pump microscopic bubbles along the hull to let the ship glide through the water with less resistance. Every fraction of a percent saved in fuel consumption translates into tons of emissions avoided and thousands of dollars saved. This quiet revolution in sustainability is about far more than corporate responsibility or regulatory compliance. It is a profound recognition that the long-term security and prosperity of any nation, its economic empire, if you will, is inextricably linked to the health of the planet. A shipping industry that pollutes the oceans and atmosphere is ultimately sawing off the very branch it sits on, threatening the stability of the global trade networks it exists to serve. The green ship of the future, therefore, is not a niche alternative. It is the essential key to continuity. It represents a new form of influence where a nation's ability to project power and maintain its economic reach will depend less on the size of its navy and more on its leadership in green technology and its commitment to a stable, habitable world. The most powerful fleet of the 21st century may be the one that leaves the lightest footprint, proving that true resilience lies not in the ability to conquer, but in the wisdom to sustain. But beyond the ledgers of trade and the logs of battle, the true legacy of these vessels is often found not in port records or naval archives, but in the human heart. The shape of a ship carved against the horizon has always been a powerful trigger for the imagination, a blank canvas upon which we project our deepest hopes, fears, and dreams of identity. Consider the Viking longship, its dragon-headed prow cutting through the mist. For the terrified monks on the shores of Lindisfarne, it was a symbol of pure demonic terror, an omen of apocalypse. But for the Norse themselves, and for generations of storytellers since, that very same silhouette became the ultimate icon of restless adventure, of the raw courage needed to sail off the edge of a known world into the utter unknown. It wasn't just a boat, it was a vessel of destiny, carrying not just warriors but an entire ethos of exploration and defiance that still captivates us today. This transformation of machine into myth is a thread that runs through centuries of naval history. The Spanish Galleon, for instance, with its towering castles and vast, billowing sails, became so much more than a transport for silver. In the public imagination, it was forever linked to romantic tales of swashbuckling pirates, of buried treasure on tropical islands, and of epic naval battles under the Caribbean sun. These stories, from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island to the Hollywood films they inspired, cemented the galleon as a symbol of daring, greed, and the intoxicating allure of newfound wealth. Its design was dramatic and imposing, perfectly suited to become a stage for our fantasies. Similarly, the sleek, breathtakingly beautiful clipper ship, racing under a full press of canvas, came to embody the frantic energy and competitive spirit of the 19th century. It represented the thrill of the race, the glory of being first, and the immense commercial ambitions of a rapidly industrializing world. Painters captured them leaning into raging seas, their white sails glowing against stormy skies, transforming these hard-working merchant vessels into symbols of a brave, speeding, and modern age. Nations were particularly quick to recognize the power of a ship's image to define their character on the world stage. The mighty ship of the line, with its orderly rows of gun ports and immense, towering masts, was more than a weapon. It was a floating piece of national propaganda. When a first-rate like HMS Victory sailed into a foreign port, its sheer, overwhelming presence was a deliberate display of British industrial might, naval discipline, and global reach. It communicated power and authority without a single shot being fired. This use of naval design as a symbol of identity continues right into the modern era. The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is today's ultimate expression of this concept. To see the USS Gerald R. Ford is to understand a specific kind of American power, immense, technologically advanced, and capable of projecting influence to any corner of the globe. Its flat, endless deck is a statement of absolute air supremacy, a mobile piece of sovereign territory that commands respect and shapes geopolitical perceptions simply by being there. The artistic world has endlessly drawn inspiration from these iconic forms, using them to explore profound themes of the human condition. The majestic tall ships of the Age of Sail are perennial favorites in maritime paintings, where they are often depicted battling elemental forces far greater than themselves, symbolizing humanity's fragile yet persistent struggle against nature. In literature, ships frequently serve as microcosms of society. Herman Melville's Moby Dick is about so much more than a whaling voyage. The Pequod is a floating world of philosophy, obsession, and destiny, with Captain Ahab's monomaniacal quest driving the entire crew toward tragedy. Joseph Conrad's works plunge into the psychological depths of command and moral ambiguity, using the confined space of a ship as a pressure cooker for human drama. Even in film, the ship remains a powerful setting, from the tragic elegance of the Titanic to the claustrophobic terror of the alien-haunted Nostromo in Alien. These stories tap into the ship's inherent nature as a vessel of isolation and community, a place where people are cut off from the world and must confront their true selves. Ultimately, the cultural footprint of a ship is often far wider and more enduring than its military or economic impact. An army conquers a territory, holds it for a time, and then often retreats, its legacy fading with the generations. But a ship's image, once it embeds itself in a culture's art, stories, and sense of self, can persist for millennia. The Trireme secured Athenian democracy, but it is the Parthenon that stands as its physical symbol. The container ship enables our modern world, but its boxy form is anonymous, rarely stirring the soul. The ships that truly last are those that capture a spirit, the adventurous spirit of the longship, the romantic spirit of the galleon, the striving spirit of the clipper. They become more than wood, iron, or steel. They become ideas, and it is these ideas, carried on the hulls of iconic designs, that truly chart the course of history, shaping how empires perceive their own destiny and how the world perceives them in return. This fascinating link between naval strength and national prosperity isn't just a modern observation. It's a concept that some of history's greatest economic minds have wrestled with for centuries. Perhaps no one made the case more persuasively than the father of modern economics himself, Adam Smith. In his monumental work, The Wealth of Nations, Smith took a close, pragmatic look at the immense cost of projecting power across great distances. He observed that maintaining a large standing army to garrison foreign territories and conquer inland empires was a staggeringly expensive endeavor. The costs of paying, feeding, and supplying tens of thousands of soldiers, not to mention the constant drain of fighting land wars, could cripple a nation's treasury. Smith argued that a powerful navy was a far more cost-effective tool for a nation seeking to build its wealth. A fleet of ships could control the vital sea lanes that carried the world's commerce, protect a nation's own merchant vessels from pirates and rivals, and project power to distant shores by threatening ports and blockading coasts. This naval presence could secure access to foreign markets and resources without the prohibitive expense of occupying and administering vast stretches of foreign land. In Smith's view, the sea was a great highway, and a strong navy was the most efficient police force and toll collector for that highway, enabling a nation to enrich itself through trade and commerce rather than through exhaustive and expensive territorial conquest. This idea was later refined and given a grand strategic framework by an American naval officer and historian, Alfred Thayer Mahan. In the late 19th century, Mahan was studying the rise and fall of global powers, and he identified a single recurring pattern. In his influential book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, Mahan introduced a term that would echo through the corridors of power in capitals around the world: sea power. For Mahan, sea power wasn't just about having a big navy, it was a holistic national strategy. It encompassed a thriving merchant marine, a network of strategic naval bases and coaling stations around the globe to support that fleet, and a robust shipbuilding industry to sustain it all. He argued that throughout history, from ancient Rome to 18th century Britain, the nation that controlled the seas ultimately controlled the world's trade routes. And whoever controlled those trade routes could dictate terms to their rivals, accumulate vast wealth, and ensure their own economic and political dominance. Mahan's theories arrived at a perfect moment, as nations like the United States, Germany, and Japan were looking to become global players. His writings became a blueprint for empire, directly inspiring naval buildups and a new era of imperial competition, because he provided a compelling intellectual argument that a strong navy was not a luxury, but the essential prerequisite for national greatness and economic supremacy. But these grand theories of Smith and Mahan are just ideas on a page without the physical means to execute them. This is where the shape of the ship becomes the critical, tangible link between economic theory and real-world power. A nation can believe in the principle of sea power, but if its shipyards can only produce sluggish, fragile, or short-ranged vessels, that theory will sink before it ever leaves port. The specific design of a ship is what physically enables the strategies these thinkers championed. Adam Smith's vision of cost-effective power projection only works if you have ships that are reliable enough to stay on station for long periods, capacious enough to carry the supplies for distant voyages, and sturdy enough to survive Atlantic storms or tropical hurricanes. The East Indiaman, with its durability and large cargo holds, was the physical tool that made the corporate empire of the Dutch and British East India Companies possible, generating the staggering profits that Smith analyzed. Similarly, Mahan's concept of controlling the sea lanes requires vessels capable of both winning battles and showing the flag across the globe. The ship of the line, with its overwhelming broadside, was the instrument that enforced Britain's control of the oceans during the Pax Britannica. It was the guarantor of the trade routes that brought raw materials to British factories and carried finished goods to the world, creating the wealth of the Industrial Revolution. Later, the Dreadnought became the ultimate expression of Mahanian theory, a ship whose very existence was meant to deter challengers and command the sea, thereby securing the economic lifelines of an empire. The right ship design effectively translates abstract economic advantage into concrete, undeniable fact. A well-designed hull allows for cheaper transport of goods, fulfilling Smith's emphasis on trade. A well-armed warship protects that trade and denies the same opportunity to rivals, fulfilling Mahan's emphasis on command. The difference between a nation that is a price taker in the global economy and one that is a price setter often comes down to the blueprints in its naval architect's office. It proves that in the grand calculus of national wealth and global influence, the elegant curve of a hull and the efficient cut of a sail are just as important as the policies of treasuries or the strategies of admirals, because they are the physical embodiment of those very ideas. From the agile trireme that secured the legacy of Athenian democracy to the colossal container ship that quietly weaves together our modern global economy, the story of human empire is in many ways a story of naval architecture. For thousands of years, while armies marched across continents, it was the shape of a ship's hull, the ingenuity of its sail plan, and the power of its propulsion that truly redrew the world map, connected disparate cultures, and built fortunes that could fund dynasties. Ground forces excel at taking and holding territory, a vital but ultimately limited form of control. Ships, however, operate on a different scale altogether. They transcend borders, transforming the vast, trackless ocean from a barrier into a highway. They are the instruments that control the flow of trade, the vehicles that project cultural and military influence across unimaginable distances, and the silent enforcers of economic blockades that can bring a nation to its knees without a single soldier ever crossing its frontier. This transformative power is not a relic of the past. As we stand on the cusp of a new nautical revolution, the lessons of history are more relevant than ever. The autonomous vessels now being tested in shipyards around the world promise a future of persistent, unmanned presence, where algorithmic efficiency could replace human endurance and redefine naval strategy. The urgent push for green shipping, with its wind-assisted propulsion, hydrogen fuel cells, and hybrid engines, isn't just about environmental responsibility. It's about ensuring the long-term sustainability of the very trade networks that underpin global power. The next great empire may not announce itself with the thunder of tank divisions or the spectacle of a military parade. It might instead emerge from the quiet hum of a nuclear reactor powering an icebreaker through the Arctic, from the digital code guiding a crewless freighter along an optimized route, or from the patented design of a new, ultra-efficient hull form that cuts fuel costs by a transformative percentage. The future of influence will likely be built on a foundation of logistical superiority, energy independence, and technological innovation, all embodied in the next generation of ships. This incredible journey, from the oar-powered galleys of antiquity to the automated giants of tomorrow, shows us that human ambition is forever bound to our ability to master the sea. It is a testament to our relentless drive to explore, to connect, and to innovate. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into how the curve of a hull and the cut of a sail have repeatedly rewritten the rules of history, there's plenty more to explore. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that looks at the hidden currents of innovation that shape our world. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you believe was the single most influential ship design in history? Was it the Viking longship that unlocked continents, the East Indiaman that built corporate empires, or the container ship that made our modern world possible? Share your perspective in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. What ship design do you think had the biggest impact on history? Was it the Viking longship that reshaped continents, the humble container ship that built our globalized world, or perhaps another vessel entirely? I am genuinely curious to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one. Your insights make this community so much richer. If you enjoyed this voyage through naval history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the innovations that secretly shaped our world. Tap the bell icon too, so you never miss a new video. For those of you who really want to help us explore even more hidden currents of history, consider supporting the channel directly by becoming a patron. Your support makes a huge difference in bringing these stories to life. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep asking big questions and exploring the fascinating